I did something the other day that I thought might be useful for some other people. So here's a video on how to host your own container registry locally. And I'm going to show a few tools I ran across along the way that made setup a little easier than some of the other methods that you might choose. So why would you want to host your own container registry locally? If you're doing some home lab stuff, or maybe you're doing some development, it may make it easier in your workflows to have something that's local that you can play with, blow away, recreate, and not worry about, messing up your customers, obviously, in production. And so that's kind of where I fell on this, as I was trying to put together some instructions on how to do some things, and it just came in handy to have a local container registry for my use. So let's switch over to the terminal window. And I'm starting off with a fresh install of Ubuntu Server 2204. And the first thing we need to do is to actually install Docker and Docker Compose. So let's do that. So sudo apt apt install docker io. Go ahead and let that service restart. And now let's do sudo apt install docker compose. Alright, so now let's verify that we actually did get that installed correctly. Do a Docker version, and let's do a Docker Compose version. And cool, we're getting responses back for both of those. So the registry is actually going to be a container we're going to grab from Docker Hub. And let's go ahead and make a directory for our configuration here. So we're going to do create a registry, if I can type. Let's go ahead and go into that registry directory. And then in here, we're also going to make another directory called data. Okay. Next thing we want to do is create a Docker Compose file here in our registry container or registry folder. So let's do that. We'll do nano compose YAML. You can use whatever text editor you prefer. And I'm just going to copy and paste the details here. So we're going to be pulling the registry version 2 container from Docker Hub. We're going to set our file system to our data folder that we just created, and we're going to be running off port 5000 and exposing that. So let's save this, exit out, and now we can stand up this container. So let's do sudo docker compose up and let it run as daemon. And you can see here it's pulling down that container and done. So let's do sudo docker ps, and you can see that Docker container is in fact running, and it's exposing port 5000 for port 5000. Cool. So that's easy. The next thing you want to do is expose this over HTTPS. Now, you could do this using starting off with Nginx and set up that reverse proxy, adding a certificate, probably a self-signed certificate, then going through the steps of trusting that certificate so that when you later run the Docker commands to pull and push, that the certificate is trusted. But we aren't going to do all that. I actually found another project that makes use of a public domain that you can use locally to expose a trusted SSL certificate. And I'm going to have links in my blog to these things. It's called local-ip.co. And the container is actually coming from a GitHub repository from Medic, and I'll have links to that in my blog as well. And the link to my blog will be down below this video in the description. So let's go ahead and stand up actually we need to go and clone this repository. So let's pop out of here and let's see, do we have Git? We do have Git, cool. All right. So we're going to clone this repository. That's, again, the links will be in the description. So I'm going to paste this in here. So we're going to get clone from this repository specifically back into our home directory. That didn't take long. So now we can go into this Nginx local IP repository, and we are going to run the following command. And what this will do is it's going to set our environment variable to point to our IP address, which this is the IP address of the server we're currently on, and using port 5000. That pulls down, gets everything up and running. All right. And so what this does is it's going to expose this domain here that we can access over HTTPS, and it'll be using a trusted certificate that it downloaded from local-ip.co. And this is a way that you can have a certificate that's trusted by the browser and by Docker internally without going through a lot more steps to get everything up and running. Like I said, there's other ways to do this, but I found this to be one of the easier ways to build a trusted, chain to get through to your Docker repository. All right, so we can actually try to use this. I guess I should say that you have to add a DNS entry, because obviously if you try to go to this, it's not going to be found. So you can do that if you're on a Windows machine. You can update your host file to let this domain point to your actual IP address of 192.168.1.235 or whatever your environment is. In my situation, I'm going to just update my DNS in my pfSense box, and so let me go do that now, and I'll be right back. All right, I've updated my local DNS. I'm leaving this container up and running so that it's always listening. So let's go check and make sure we can actually get to this IP address. So let's do a ping of this URL or domain. And you can see here I am getting a response. So it is actually hitting my local Ubuntu server on my local network. Sweet. So the next thing we want to do is, let me go ahead and open up another SSH instance here. Actually, you know what? Let's go look at what this is doing. So let's go to HTTPS. Boop. And so this probably won't return anything. What we actually want to do is do a v2. And here we are. So we're now hitting that container repository that we have stood up, going through this proxy Nginx server. And so if we do something like catalog, right now we don't have any container images in our repository because we just stood this up. So next we want to try pushing something to this repository and see how that works. So let's go ahead and do another SSH into this, so 192.168.1.235. Okay. So the way we're going to do this is we're just going to pull down a standard image from Docker Hub, the Ubuntu image. We're going to modify it slightly, commit it, and then push it to our local repository. So let's do that. So let's do sudo docker run -t-i. So this is going to take us into a shell once it stands it up and starts running. And we'll do bin bash. pull down the image, stands it up, and now we're actually in the shell, as you can see, based off of the way this looks. So we're running as root in this container. If we do a ls, you can kind of see what we've got sitting here in a standard image. So let's go ahead and do a new file. We're going to call it testing a demo. And now when we do ls, you can see over here we've got testing a demo. So this doesn't come standard. Let's exit out of here. Now that image still exists on our machine, but it's not running. So what we can do is we can say now docker commit docker pslq, so the last image on our machine, and we're going to call this new image test image. And we got to run it with sudo there. I had to do sudo on both of those things for the Ubuntu server here, which is fine. So we should be able to do sudo docker images. And now you can see we've got a test image sitting here that we can push. So clear the screen. First thing we want to do is tag this thing. So let's do that. Let's do sudo docker tag test image. And we're going to tag this so that it's going to wind up on our local repository. So it's going to be 192.168.1.235. I should have just copied this. My local ip.co test image. Okay. And so now if we do docker images, you can see that this has been, it's going to look like it's coming from that repository where we've tagged it properly. So let's go ahead now and push this to our local repository. Because again, if we go look at our local repository right now, we've got nothing in there. So let's push this, let's clear the screen. And I'm not going to type this again, so let's just do copy paste here, so sudo, and so all I'm doing is pushing my image exactly where I want it to go, which is my local repository. So let's do that. Perfect. Now we should be able to go back and see that we now have test image sitting in our repository. Now this is kind of a crappy view, right? And so I found another project out there that you can use to have a prettier interface. And so I'm going to stand that up just so you can see what that kind of looks like. Again, the links for this will be in my blog. And so I'm going to use this Docker registry browser from Klaus Meyer, I think is how you pronounce that, and expose that over port 8080. And so let's just do that. Okay, so now this thing is running and it's exposed over port 8080. And so if I'm gonna grab and copy this just to make it easier. So if I go do a new thing here, so I'm going to that IP address over port 8080, and you can see here I've got my test image. I can click on that, see all the different tags that would exist. I can then click on that and get even more information based off of that particular build. So just kind of a neat project. So instead of looking at some JSON back from that endpoint, you can have a better view of all the images that you have, and as well as browsing in and seeing all the different tags or versions available of that container. So just kind of a neat project to keep in mind. The next thing we want to do, just to kind of bring this full circle, is pull this image down and just make sure that we're getting the right image. And so let's go back to our terminal window. I'm going to go ahead and stop this because honestly we don't need this anymore. And so I'm going to copy where we're going to pull this. So sudo, and you'll see Docker pull, and we're pulling from my local repository, and we're grabbing the latest of test image because we're not specifying any particular tag. And there we go. That's there. And the next thing we're going to do is we're going to stand this thing up and shell into it. And to verify that this is in fact our container that we created, or our image that we created, do a ls, and you can see here, there's our directory. So we're good to go. And that concludes this video. This is just a quick way to stand up a local repository if you have a need for it. If you enjoyed this video or at least found it interesting, please like it so other people can see it. There might be someone out there that needs, or this type of functionality locally on their own network to, and haven't explored how to accomplish that. All right, appreciate you watching. Thanks.